Okay, so after that short introduction, we are now going to dive in and look at running our first command within the shell environment. So for the first sort of part of today, we are just going to think of the shell as kind of a fancy, or depending how you look at it, a difficult to use kind of type of file browser. So you'll be used to using Windows Explorer or its equivalents on other operating systems to navigate the files in your computer. And you can use the shell in much the same way. And much like a file navigator, the shell has a concept of the current directory in which it is currently working. We can use a command to interrogate the shell about which directory it considers the current directory it is working in. The command to do this is pwd. So to run this, that's just the three letters pwd typed into the shell. And then in order to execute the command, you just hit the return key. So we've executed the command pwd, and we then get the output of that command printed onto our screen. In this case, the output of pwd is telling me that I am within the directory Cave-Ayland, which is within the directory home, which is within the root directory of the file system. Probably everybody is familiar with the idea that the file system, the files on your computer, are arranged in this hierarchical manner where you have files within folders that are within other folders, etc. And this, the output of pwd is simply representing this, and it's very common. You'll see the character / is being used to denote different levels of the file system. So in this case, the / here indicates that Cave-Ayland is within home, and then the preceding / is a special character which represents the root file system, and that's just the directory which contains the entirety of the file system itself. Some systems don't have a single root directory. On Windows, for instance, each drive letter can be considered a root of a file system. But in Linux, and indeed in the shell environment that you're working in today, all of your files are considered to exist within one root directory. So we've seen that how you can use pwd to find the current directory that your shell is working in. In this case, the home Cave-Ayland is the home directory for my user. That is the folder in which the files owned by my particular user account are generally kept. And your shell, by default, should have opened up in the home directory of your system. Depending on which operating system you're using, you may find that you're in a somewhat different location. But that's to be expected. What I have here is a very typical example for a Linux system. So pwd can be used to find the directory we're working in. We can then ask the shell to report the contents of the directory, the working directory, using another command. So this is the second one we'll see today. This is another simple, straightforward, short one, ls. ls is short for listing, and that's exactly what ls is supposed to do, is it shows you the contents of the current directory. So let's press return, again, to execute that. And you should get a whole bunch of output on the screen. Now again, your output will vary depending on just the contents of your home directory, the stuff that you have built up in there over time or not. As you can see, mine is a bit messy. I tend to leave lots of things lying around. One thing you'll also notice here are the colours. You may or may not have colours in your output. If you don't, then I fully recommend working out how to switch those on. It's well worth doing a little Google. How do I get colours in the output of ls? Because the colors are helpful to you as a user, just to very quickly understand the output of ls. For instance, for me here, everything which is within the current directory and is another directory is colored in blue. So within my home directory, I have a desktop directory, I have a documents and a downloads directory, etc. You're very likely to have those or equivalents, and then I have other things as well. If you don't have colors in the short term, then we can actually slightly modify the command of ls to make it slightly more easy to understand. So we'll run the command again, ls, but afterwards we'll add a space followed by a dash and a capital F. Hit return one more time. What we get now is you'll see more or less the same output. The only difference here is that by including -f here after ls, we've told the ls command to include in its output slashes after anything that's a directory. So this is just handy so that you can, at a glance, even if you don't have colors in your output of your ls command, you can very easily tell what is a directory and what is a file. So before I talk any more about what we just did here, I'm going to make one more modification to the ls command that we run. So let's run ls space -f, another space, and then just a / by itself. Hit enter again, and you find that now the output is very different. We're getting a completely different set of files and directories. We even have some of these extra characters appended here. So it's worth just breaking down the form of the command that we just ran, because this follows a very common pattern that we're going to see quite a lot today. So we can take the last command we ran and break it into 3 parts. So the first part is properly known as the command itself. In this case, we're saying we want to run the ls command. We want to do something around listing existing files and directories into the output of the terminal. This is followed by one or more of what are called options. So these tend to start with a dash. They sometimes start with 2 dashes. We'll see some examples of that later on. There's sometimes, as well as options, they're sometimes known as flags or switches. And the role of options like this are to, in some way, tweak the behavior of the command that you're running. So in this case, we're saying to ls, do what list files and directories, but when you do it, modify the output in this way so that it's clearer for the user to understand. Finally, we have the /. Here we say the / is acting as an argument to the command. Now again, some commands expect arguments, some commands do not expect arguments, and some they are optional, as in the case of ls. When we ran ls previously without an argument, it was listing the contents of the current directory in which the shell was working. When we add the / as an argument here, this tells ls, actually, I don't want to know about the current directory, tell me about the directory that I've specified as the argument. In this case, just giving a / specifies the root directory of the whole file system, and so we see a different set of files and directories, the ones that are in the root directory instead. It's important to note here that spaces are really important. So the shell uses spaces as a way of splitting up the different parts of commands. So it's important to make sure those are in there, and if you don't include them, then things may not work correctly. The other thing to bear in mind is that capitalization is important, so -F is different than -f. So we've seen how each command can have different options that change its behavior in some way, and different arguments that tell the command to act on a different location of the file system, a different set of files, or something else entirely. But there's nothing inherent about the ls command which tells us anything about which options it has available and that you are able to use for it, and whether or not it expects an argument, or what it will do with that argument if it's provided. So in this case, the shell does quite a lot to help you out in terms of providing ways for you to find out more about individual commands and to find out which options they support and how they use different arguments. There are two ways to do this, and depending on your system, one of them may not work. If the first one doesn't work, then bear with us until we get to the second one, and you should find that it works for you. So we have the ls command. We're now going to provide an option to the ls command. This is going to be the first one we've seen with two dashes in front of it. Where there are two dashes in front of an option, it expects a full word for that option instead of a single letter. In this case, we're going to say ls --help. Now this is a very common thing. The majority of commands have a --help. Recognize the --help option and will provide some output. So you'll notice that a bunch of stuff just got output onto your terminal. You have to scroll back up. You can do that usually with a scroll bar at the side. You have to scroll back up until you get to the top. You can see here this is the prompt, and this is where we ran the ls-help command. So the output of help is designed to do just that. It's designed to help you figure out how to use the command correctly. So they usually start with this usage line, and this is there's a lot of information that's kind of coded into this that it's worth just picking out. So ls is the name of the command we will run. Then we have option and then file. But then we have these sort of weird bits of syntax here as well. We have these square brackets here and these ellipses that follow onwards. What these essentially mean are, well, the square brackets mean that this component of the command is optional. So it is optional for us to use options. The first time we ran ls, we didn't give it any options at all, and it worked fine. So the square brackets means we can provide options if we want to, but we don't have to. And the ellipses here means that we can provide as many options as we like. We can provide more than one at once, or we can provide more than one at once if we want to. Similarly here, it's saying after all the options are done, it expects arguments, and here it's called those arguments file. Notice we have the same syntax here, so we don't have to provide an argument. Again, the first time we ran it, we didn't provide an argument to ls. And again, notice the ellipses, we can provide one or more files, where a file can also be a directory, in which case ls will report the contents of each, it will list each file or the contents of each specified directory that it is provided with. You then normally get a short one or two sentence description of what the command does, and then this is followed normally by quite a lengthy set of all of the different options that the command supports. If we, for instance, scroll down to -F here, $F here, we can see that this has the description, append indicator to entries, and indeed / is one of the indicators that we saw used. So to get back to your prompt, you can just scroll back down. Now, if the --help option didn't work for you, the alternative is what's called a manual page. To access the manual page for a command, you simply type man followed by the command that you would like to get some help with, in this case ls, turn again to execute. Now, the output of this is slightly different. So you'll notice that things are in a slightly different order, but we have all of the same information. In particular, we have this, the very similar sort of usage ls line here under the synopsis heading. So the man command actually takes over your terminal. You can no longer type in commands like you were used to. This is called a pager. The idea of this is that where the output of ls-help was quite long and it filled up our terminal, man automatically opens its help in this pager so that it doesn't fill your terminal with lots of rubbish. In this environment, you can use the arrow keys to scroll up and down. Down arrow to go down, up arrow to go up. And you'll see as you scroll down, you can see all of the same options as described by the ls-help. But in this man page format instead. You can also use page up and page down to go more quickly. In order to get back to our normal terminal and to keep working again, you just have to press the Q key. It helpfully tells you that at the bottom of the screen. Once you press Q, we go straight back to the terminal, and as I said, we go directly back to after we ran man ls. We don't have the contents of that, so the output of that command is not retained in the terminal because we were using that pager. So this just helps to keep things a little neat.